6 months ago, I made the decision to move to the enterprise team and got promoted to enterprise SDR manager. Had previous experience in this segment, but I really struggled in the first 3 months, and I was wondering if I made the good decision. I started to do some research, and I usually love to read or listen stuff online to learn about a new topic, but I couldn't find a lot of resources about enterprise prospecting. And so that's why today I receive Brad Norgate, Senior Enterprise SDR at Cognism, to talk about enterprise prospecting. And also, before we start, to let you know, Brad is part of the top 3 SDR team, enterprise SDR team at Cognism. Hey everyone, I'm Alrik. Welcome back to another episode of the SDR Game podcast. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alrik. It's a pleasure to be here. When you reached out, I was really happy to join you on the podcast, and hopefully we have a good conversation. I mean, I'm an SDR myself, so as you said, it's about finding those resources, those podcasts that actually give you actionable tips. So I'm hoping that what we do today will be able to do that for my fellow SDRs.
Perfect, and that's where I'm going to do today. So, before we start, can you explain what you do at Cognism?
Yeah, of course. What we do at Cognism as a company, or what I do?
Both.
Both. So, I mean, Cognism, we're a B2B contact data supplier. So we're not reinventing the wheel per se, but we're taking a service which has been out there and we're doing it better. So, I mean, the sales team, SDRs in particular, they all need contact data. So we provide them mobile, cells, emails, and that's what we do all the way from the small companies right up to the big enterprises of the world. In terms of what I do at Cognism, I'm a Senior Enterprise SDR, so there are 3 sort of rungs on the ladder, if you like, of SDRs. There's commercial, which is anything under 500, enterprise, which is anything over 500, and then Senior Enterprise, which is the same as enterprise, but you have a higher target and you have higher expectations in the way of revenue and that sort of thing. And so I'm fortunately up there in the Senior Enterprise, and that's what I do. So a lot of cold calling, a lot of cold emailing, a lot of rejection, basically. Professional objection handler, I think.
On which market are you working? Are you working on the English market, EMEA, or globally?
Yeah, so we've actually we've actually recently restructured it. So we used to be just EMEA, but now so long as our name is on the account, our account executive's name is on the account, we can speak to decision makers from anywhere in the world. So I might be calling Europe in the morning, UK in the morning, and then US in the afternoon. So I'm from speaking to some other SDRs at different companies. I think that's probably a pretty common work day. You know, speaking to different time zones, different times.
How big is the enterprise SDR team at Cognism?
Yeah, I want to say we are about the enterprise in particular. We're about 25, I think. We could be 30. I know we've got. Yeah, I think the enterprise team in total is between 45 and 50. Sorry, excuse me. The SDR team in total is 45 and 50, and then the enterprise I think is about 25 to 30.
I know you already talked a little bit about Cognism, but what's your ICP and your buyer personas?
Yeah, so we target. It's actually quite nice because we're speaking to the go-to-market teams, right? Which is marketing, obviously sales, and RevOps and sales ops as well. It's quite nice because we're also in the go-to-market team, so you have a little bit of instant rapport sometimes, anyway. And so we're speaking to heads of sales development, SDR managers. We're speaking to heads of sales, directors, VP of sales, CROs, and then on the marketing side, the CMOs, the VP marketing, all of those. And then we've also as well the VPs of RevOps, of sales ops, and directors of sales ops as well. So those are our 3 main ICPs really.
Right. And what kind of companies are you going after? Do you have a focus on tech, or it's all businesses in general?
As far as I understand, I know our RevOps team mainly identifies accounts based on their sales team size. And if they've got SDRs, we know that 9 times out of 10 we can serve them. So there's not a particular industry. However, from my experience, and I think the company's wider experience, any company in tech is a good fit for us in particular. But in terms of particular industries, I've got everything from sort of logistics and freight all the way up to software and fintechs. So there's a real spectrum of companies that we're serving. The main identifier, I should say, is whether they have an SDR team.
Yeah, which makes sense because
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
basically something they're going to use daily. So
exactly.
As an enterprise SDR, what's your goals? Monthly goals or quarterly goals?
Yeah, target wise, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have 10, we work on a meeting attended model. So we used to be on an SQO model, but we moved over to a meeting attended model. And our target is in Senior Enterprise is 10 meetings attended a month.
Okay.
And we also recently have introduced a revenue target, which is 125. Oh, I'm trying to think now. I want to say about 125k a quarter, and that's in terms of pipeline generation. So we have two separate targets.
Okay. And so that's the goals. And now, do you have KPIs or what's your KPIs? Your daily KPIs?
Yeah, so our management team are very good at understanding different SDRs work in different ways. So we don't have something that is absolutely set in stone. It's very often different to different SDRs based on their conversion rates, based on how they book the majority of their meetings. There's no sort of blanket KPI. However, it is expected that around 100 touch points a day for the average SDR is what's needed to get you to target. So if you're underperforming, there's that expectation there, which is obviously emails, LinkedIn messages, phone calls as well, Alrik. So
Okay, so it means that you can, if you're performing, you can do 50 touch points a day. That's what you're saying?
well, I guess from the management perspective, if you are if you're working, you're well on track for your target, and you're doing 50 calls a day, then clearly based on your numbers that's adequate for you, and you're overachieving with that, versus someone else who might need to do a little bit more to get to the same. So yeah, I would say you're right.
Yeah, okay, that's good. That's and also it means that you can make your own decisions on which channel you want to focus on, because you are not. mm, Because I imagine for you, when we are preparing this, you are mentioning that you are more focused on the phone. So I
Yeah, I
imagine
am.
for
Yeah.
you, on your KPIs, you have more touch points on the phone. So do you use the phone, but do you use also other channels?
Yeah, I do use other channels. Most of my pipeline, and when I say pipeline, that's sort of callbacks, your SDR pipeline, right, as opposed to the dollar amount. Most of that is all generated through my activities cold calling. But a lot of my follow up also includes LinkedIn messages that are that are personalized to the company and sometimes to the individual, and then also emails as well. So especially if you get referrals and things like that. So it is multi touch, but I would say in terms of the cold outreach, the bulk of mine definitely is geared towards the phone. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I know you mentioned that you don't have like a set KPI for each individual at Cognism, but do you set your own KPIs? Do you say, hey, every day I want to do 50 calls, or do you have your own goals?
Yeah, so I mean, actually, I think a big part of being a success as an SDR is understanding your own numbers. Now, I hate the phrase, that it's a numbers game, because it really overgeneralizes things. But you do have to understand your own conversion rates, right? And how many calls, your inputs to get your outputs, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So for me, I know that I need to make, or aim to make anyway, around 60 calls a day to get enough connects or conversations to generate the pipeline I need to hit my target every month. And then, of course, in between that, there's a lot of follow up on LinkedIn and email as well, sprinkled in between.
Yeah, what's your connect rate, average connect rate?
So my average connect rate, because obviously we have access to mobile numbers, is on a good day around 15%, and then on a lower day around 10-11%. Which is still above industry average. So we're quite fortunate here.
That's really good. We are at 5-6% on average at Cheaper.
Well,
So
listen, you got to use,
yeah.
this is shameless plug, but you got to use Cognism contact data if you want to fix that, I guess. Had to be done. Come on, it had to be done.
Yeah.
Too easy.
No, yeah, I know. No, but that's good. Okay, and so you have your 60 calls. And then also you mentioned LinkedIn and emails. Do you set a target per? Do you have a daily target for that also? Or?
No, so the LinkedIn follow-ups and the emails are ad hoc. So it's
Okay.
based on my pipeline of follow-ups and hot prospects. But to give you an idea into an average day, it's probably anywhere between, on the lower end, 5 LinkedIn messages, on the higher end 10, and then about the same for emails, because these are really they're personalized. They take time to research these touch points, so that's why they're on the lower end. Yeah.
Yeah. So now I wanted to talk about your days. How do you structure? Do you structure your days, or do you structure your weeks? Because I know for some people it's different. They have like every Monday they do the same, but Tuesday and the rest of the week they do something else. Or some people they have the same schedule for every day. How do you structure your days or
Yeah,
weeks?
I mean, personally, I definitely prefer to structure my day. I find that when you've got a monthly target to hit, it can seem quite daunting, but I find always that if you break it down into what you need to do every single day, that's a lot more, it's much easier, more digestible for someone like me, as opposed to breaking it down into a week, right? So what I do to go into my day-to-day routine, Cognism SDRs, we populate or prospect our own accounts. So we're given, in the enterprise anyway, we're given our accounts by our AEs. We have around 40 accounts, and then it's our job to make sure that we're keeping those populated and refreshed with the correct prospects, the decision makers. And so in the morning, I might spend anywhere between...
Sorry to interrupt before you go in the morning. So you said 40 accounts. Are they monthly accounts, or it's a pool of accounts that you are constantly refreshing, or?
So you're correct. It's a pool of accounts that we're constantly refreshing. So we don't get 40 new accounts every month. We get those 40 accounts, and then we drop and replace as and when it's necessary. Either we've booked a meeting and it's turned into an opportunity, and we need a new account to supplement that, or it turns out that it's a bad fit, and similarly we need a different account to replace it. So that's how we work it.
And do you, basically those 40 accounts, do you think on a monthly basis, how many accounts are removed from your pool, and how many accounts do you add per month, more or less?
Yeah, I would say, for me personally, on the lower end, some months it can be as few as 2 or 3. You know, if you've got these big enterprise accounts that you've got plenty of prospects to go after, oftentimes your AE will turn around and say, hey, listen, we haven't had luck so far. Why don't you target these guys within the account? Let's not drop it yet. But then on the higher end, it could be, you know, if you're having a real spring clean, it could be 5 to, even on a bad month, I've got rid of 10 accounts before. But that's normally if I've been a bit of a bad SDR and I've let them build up. So yeah.
And let's go back on your routine. So you are starting to talk about the morning. What's your routine during mornings?
Yeah, so the first part is that repopulating and keeping the prospects in the accounts refreshed. So that can take anywhere from half an hour to an hour, and that's really based on, in the morning anyway, how your tasks are looking for the day. So
when you say refreshed, what do you mean?
Sure. So, for instance, if I've been working account for 2 months and I've had maybe 30 or 40 prospects that have gone through an entire sequence and I haven't had any traction, I'm going to go back into the account on Cognism platform, for instance, and I'm going to find new decision makers, new prospects to put into cadence, right? Put into sequence. So that's that process. But then also you're going to have new accounts, right? That you need to do that in the first instance. So that's the first half an hour to an hour of my day.
Okay, what's next after when you refresh your prospects?
So next is confirming any meetings, of course, that you've got for that day. That's super essential for your show rate, right? Is making sure that you can get them on the phone, you can confirm the meeting, and so that's happening from 10 to 10:30, any time in between, and that's what I'm doing then.
And how long does it take? Like 30 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on the
Well,
day?
yeah, I mean, you're not taking the full 30 minutes, right? It could be done in, I guess if you've got no meetings on that day, then you can skip this. But if you're watching this podcast, you probably are booking enough meetings to be doing this most days. So, yeah, so it's obviously just calling prospects quickly. That could be 5 to 10 minutes, really.
And then when you confirm all your meetings, what do you do next?
Yeah, so once you've populated your accounts, you've got tasks for the day, you're pretty much ready to start cold calling. So I'll have then a power hour, which is pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to get on the phones. I'm gonna call the prospects that I've got in my tasks on outreach, and hopefully, if I don't book a few meetings, I'm going to get a few callbacks. So that's what I do with that hour, which is about 10:30 to 11:30. It normally works out.
Do you prep your cold calling sessions? When, for example, do you prep your cold calling session for your per hour during your first 30 minutes or 1 hour? Which part do you prep that?
No, so for me, in particular, I in outreach, obviously you can see your previous interactions with that prospect. So what I prefer to do is actually just start that power hour, call prospects, and as I go, I check their LinkedIn to make sure it's up to date, and I check my previous activity with them, sort of a matter of seconds. And I find that for me, that's enough with my cold calling approach. That's enough to give me everything I need. So there are other SDRs in the office and that I know have a lot of success from researching very heavily beforehand. I don't take that approach. I prefer to do sort of a volume of cold calls. Yeah.
For those who are listening, we're going to talk about how Brad cold calls after talking about the structure. So no worries about that. So you do power hour. Then what's next?
Yeah, so then next is either any admin that you've had. So hopefully if you booked a meeting, you've got to create that opportunity in Salesforce. And the reason I put that off until before lunch is so that I don't have to interrupt my power hour to do that. But also, so it's a little bit of admin and then a little bit of personalized follow-up over email or over LinkedIn. These things which are going to take a little bit more time. You have to really sit down at your laptop, do a bit of research before you send those emails and those LinkedIn messages. So that's what I do typically between 11:30 and 12.
Okay, right before lunch. So
Yeah, right before lunch.
okay, so after lunch, what do you do?
So after lunch, you sit down. I prefer for me that to get me sort of back into the after I've been out for lunch and I've been around with all my friends. I need to get back into the headspace of work, and so the way I do that is with more personalised follow-ups, any admin for the week that needs to be done. It's hard to speak on the specifics of the admin because it can be different, obviously, day to day, and different companies will have different things. But yeah, sort of almost like a monotonous task to get you back into the right. We need to get our blinkers on and start working again. So that's typically from sort of 1 to 1:30. So that's any follow-ups, any admin.
What do you do after your admin session?
Then it's power hour number 2 for me, where I'm going to be calling probably the stateside, the US numbers in my sequence, and pretty much with the same goal as the first power hour. Just call as many people as I can, get as many callbacks or meetings booked as possible.
For example, for the 2 hours, do you have a specific goals on number of conversation you want to have, on number of calls you want to make, or just try to use?
Well, it comes back to that. Sorry, Alrik, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, sorry.
Oh, it comes back to that understanding your numbers and your conversion rates, right? So I know that normally I need 60 calls a day, and 6 conversations, right? Or 6 plus conversations from that would be a good result for me. So I try and obviously do 30 in the morning and then 30 in the afternoon. If I'm on a roll, I like to do a little bit more, and that normally comes in the afternoon, where I extend that power hour and just keep calling to maybe 2:33. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay, and so after your second power hour, what do you do?
Again, so it's back to similar to the morning. Any op creation that you've got to do, I do that now. That's to save me doing any admin during power hours. Then it's going to be back to the personalised follow-ups. So that will be researching some of the accounts that I've got, taking some screenshots to send people in there of the platform, or maybe recording a few vidyards, a few videos to send to prospects. And normally I find this takes me about an hour to send anywhere between 5 and 10 personalised follow-ups.
What's next?
Yeah, so now let me have a think. We're at about 4 o'clock. So I'm probably, at this point, I'm reviewing any sort of internal reports that are sent around. So we get reports like responded, but not actioned. And those reports are really helpful. Those Salesforce reports are really helpful for highlighting anything that may have fallen through the net. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit in those reports. And oftentimes I go through those at the end of the day, and I call those people back that perhaps I haven't realised, and I might book an extra meeting from that. So that normally takes about another hour to clear that.
Okay, and so what's on the report? Is it like, for example, inbound leads from your accounts that come? I don't know, that they downloaded something on the website or something like that, or?
Yeah, so not so much that, it's more, Alrik. For instance, we have. So if I mark a prospect, if I've had a call with them, or Outreach can see they've responded to an email, but maybe I've missed it in my inbox, right? Or I haven't actioned it yet, that goes into a Salesforce report and gets sent to me. So at the end of the day, I might have 10 prospects there that have either replied to my email, have given me an objection on a cold call, and I haven't set any next steps. And then I can just go through those and set the next steps that I need to with them.
Oh, that's good. Wow.
It is good. It's very helpful.
I imagine, because I remember sometimes I was forgetting to do those kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So
I'm very forgetful.
yeah, but same, because it's when you're doing too much stuff during the day, you can just keep an email. You forget to answer to an email. So that's pretty good. And that's your last activity of the day, or do you do something else before leaving the office?
Yeah, I think that sort of last hour of the day can be a combination of things, and it's never really. I guess most SDRs will probably relate to this, because every day is slightly different. It's never the same. You know, sometimes you're doing admin, sometimes you're still cold calling, and then sometimes you're doing personalized follow-ups. But whatever, it will be one of those three at that last hour of the day. Yeah.
Now let's talk about cold calling, because I know
Yeah,
that's
please.
something you are.
It's my favorite.
It's your favorite, so that's good. So when we are preparing the episode, you are telling me that your favorite, that you're really good at building reports. You are using a lot stuff from Chris Voss. So can you let us know what's your approach with cold calling?
Yeah, so my approach with cold calling is one that's actually quite repetitive. Most people in the office are probably sick of hearing my same intro every time. But I like to keep it consistent, just because then, you know, if it's not working, you can change it. If you change too many things at once, right, you don't know what is and isn't working. So I keep that the same, which is a permission-based opener, which I'm sure people have read about on LinkedIn. So that's pretty much me saying, this is a cold call, do you want to hang up now? Give me 30 seconds, right? And I think where I initially heard that is from a man called Benjamin Dennehy on LinkedIn, who's the UK's most hated sales trainer. He's fantastic, by the way. Any SDR watching this should go and have a look. But it's just a typical sort of Sandler selling style opener, right? And then I move on to my intro or my hook, where I whatever the ICP I'm speaking to, I'll say typically I speak to Alrik, if you're an SDR manager, and they tell me they're frustrated because, for Cognism anyway, the example would be they're not having enough conversations with the right decision makers. And then I'll move on to 3 problems. And the importance for me of listing these problems is it's a very quick sort of qualification piece. Either they've got one of those problems and we can have a conversation around it, or alternatively, they're telling me they don't have one of those problems and I need to discuss that, explore that a little bit further. So, I mean, if it's helpful, I can give the examples that I would use on a cold call.
Can you do, let's do like I'm an SDR leader, I'm your prospect runner. So what will be the three pain points for an SDR leader?
Yeah, so Alrik, I would say, you know, typically I speak to SDR leaders and they tell me perhaps they're frustrated. You know, the team have got the tech, they've got everything they need. They're just not speaking to as many decision makers as they could be. And they normally, Alrik, give me one of 3 reasons for that. Either they don't know who to speak to in the companies they're reaching out to. Number 2 is maybe they know exactly who they want to speak to. They just can't get the cell phones, the emails for those people. Or sometimes number 3 is they've got all that information, they've got a piece of tech that's trying to solve that, it's just not giving them the results that they were hoping for. And then I finish it off with what I think has become a little bit of my signature, which is, I've got a funny feeling, Alrik, you're going to tell me now that not a word there really applies in your world. And it's a little bit, when I started out, it felt a little bit cheeky, but it's a little bit different to just the typical, you know, does any of that resonate with you? That's a very simple question. And actually you're using a bit of Chris Ross's negotiation techniques where you're almost daring them to say no. So in actuality, what happens is you actually get a lot more yeses from that. So that's the reason I started using that to end that that sequence.
Before talking about the hook, you are saying that, for example, if you don't have, for example, the prospect doesn't have like any of those pain points, you said that you're going to dig a little bit more. So what do you start asking?
Yeah, so Alrik, if you turned around and said to me, "No, listen, none of that really applies. We're all good. We're all fine," which happens quite a lot. I would say, no, that's fine. I'm glad, number one, that it's going as perfectly as it sounds. But my question off the back of that, Alrik, would be: is that because your team aren't cold calling, they're not cold emailing, they're not using those, or is it something else? That's what I would ask, to then dig into, what's going on. What is their processes there? What is their current systems? Or is this just a brush off objection, which is my job as an SDR to try and get past? So that's the question I'd ask, Alrik.
Yeah, because I imagine sometimes that people that are not listening, but then when you are asking this question, that's when you realize that maybe they are just not listening to you. So
Yeah.
let's say, for example, let's say, we use, even though I said no, I don't have any pain points, but then I say, yeah, my team is making, I don't know, 50 cold calls per day, for example. What do you say next?
Well, I say obviously they're using the phone to generate new business. Are you telling me that that's going perfectly, Alrik? They can speak to who they want when they want, and there's no issues surrounding that. Am I understanding that correctly? And the reason I asked that, I mean, I'm guessing most sales leaders are probably then going to say, well, no, it's not perfect. It's never perfect. That's something I hear quite often, which for an SDR is like the golden egg, where you've just got a little bit of a foot in the door now to say, well, listen, if it's not perfect, what's going wrong with it? Is it that they're not speaking to the right people, or they're just not they're not having a high enough connect rate? And it just really, these questions, Alrik, just allow you to start a conversation, which is your ultimate goal with a cold call.
Yeah. And do you talk about benchmark for an average of the connect rate, for example, on the cold call with your prospects? For example, because if I say, yeah, no, I think we are good, do you talk about a specific number? Because I was mentioning earlier, for example, we have 5 or 6% average on connect rate. So that's, if we compare to your average connect rates, that's pretty low. So do you talk about that?
It's less about, it's my approach anyway, is less about trying to force numbers down their throat and more about trying to understand their situation and then positioning Cognism as a solution. So I've got to find a pain, right? In order for me to use my approach, I have to find a pain. So to answer your question, I wouldn't probably say, oh, your connect rate's 5%, well, Cognism's is 10%. I would probably say something along the lines of, listen, it sounds like from what you're telling me, you're pretty happy with a connect rate of 5% right now. I'm an SDR at Cognism. We have a connect rate of maybe 10%. If your team, is it fair to say that if your team were getting double the amount of connects, they might just book double the amount of meetings? And then it's about getting them to notice that perhaps there is a bit of an opportunity there. Getting them to see the value of the product and really getting them to buy in, and then we're kicking again. We're firing on all cylinders, and we can start the conversation. We can carry it on.
So let's say I have a pain. When do you stop the cold call? Do you try to dig a little bit on the pain, and then when you find, I don't know what you're looking for here, but what do you do?
So when I started out cold calling, and certainly when I joined Cognism, my cold calls were a lot shorter. They were like 5 minutes. And once I got to a point where I realized they had a pain, I would very quickly ask the question, hey, listen, if Cognism could solve that pain, is there any reason you wouldn't want to discuss this with me? Bang, book a meeting. But obviously moving up into enterprise, I've realized that doesn't always work too well when it comes to pipeline generation, right? It becomes a lot more about qualification. And finding their pains, challenges, and goals. So I've had to adapt that approach a little bit. So the first half stays the same, and then the second half you asked about, once I found the pain, what am I doing? So now I'm going to ask them more questions about their current processes. I'm going to ask them what regions are they currently targeting, what industries are they currently targeting, and then I'm going to position Cognism as a solution to specifically those regions, those industries, those decision makers, and that's how I'm going to close it. So I guess to answer your question, once I've found a pain, I'm going to carry on to do another 1 to 2 minutes of discovery with that prospect before I come to the close. And that's just to make sure that my pipeline generation is as good as it can be. Still leaves a little bit to be desired if you ask my manager. So I'm still something I'm working on. Can always be better.
Now, how do you end the call actually? So now you find the pain and then you ask more questions around this pain. So how do you end the call?
Yeah, so in the dream scenario, if you've done things by the book here, you've found a pain, you've probably quantified that pain, so they understand that it's causing them a problem and that they're losing out. And then the last step is just to position Cognism as a solution to that problem. Now, it's not enough, I've found, certainly in enterprise, just to say, hey, listen, Cognism can solve that. Do you want to have a chat? It's more about, especially if you're speaking to VPs, to directors, they want to know exactly how you can do it. So is this half an hour a good use of their time? So what I would say is, Alrik, if we've had a discussion and I found out that you're targeting CTOs in Europe, and actually your connect rate is 5%, but you think it could be higher and you're missing out on opportunities, I'm going to bundle that all into one final paragraph, which is pretty much, well, paragraph's the wrong word, one final sort of statement, which is saying, Alrik, Cognism can solve that by providing you contact data for X, Y, Z, and we can solve that issue, and hopefully the goal being to increase your connect rate and increase your pipeline generated. If we could do that, is there any reason you wouldn't meet with us to discuss this further? And if you've done the cold call well, then the answer is probably yes. So that's how I go in for the close.
And do you do the first call or do you have any taking the first call?
So it depends. For my meetings anyway, I'm booking 99% of them over the phone. So it goes, in that case, straight to the AE. But there will be instances where perhaps the AE thinks you've not done enough discovery and you have to host a second discovery call over Zoom, and then you then pass that on to a demo. Anything booked over LinkedIn, email that you haven't had a cold call will normally have to go to a discovery call led by the SDR before you can put it on for demo. But most of my calls are just cold call to demo with the AE.
Okay, and when you say, for example, if you do the a second discovery call, you do it and not the AE. So are you same? Are you just looking for a pain, or do you have something else to find out?
Well, for me, if that happens, as I say, for us anyway, Alrik, one of two things has happened. You've booked it over LinkedIn and you don't have enough information, or you've booked it over the phone, but again, you don't have enough information. So you have to, that's the goal of the call. It clues in the name with the discovery. So obviously we've got a set of questions we need to ask. But it's important for me anyway in how I run my discovery calls. At the beginning of the call, I just lay out exactly what we're using these 15 minutes for. I'm going to say, listen, you've told me that you're interested in Cognism. I just have to understand if it's a good use of both of our time, if we're a good fit. Can I ask a few questions? And if at the end of this, it seems like we're a good fit, are you happy to book a next step demonstration? And then what that happens is, by the time you've asked those questions, it seamlessly moves on to a demonstration with an AE.
Now I wanted to talk about the when you are preparing this, you are mentioning that for you it's more about being relevant than personalizing, and actually you talk about this here, but so your approach is more around focusing on buyer personas and then talking about the pain points they have, or what's your approach on this?
Well, yeah, there's been a lot of noise lately on LinkedIn about is personalization better, is relevance better, and I personally, from my own experience, have taken the stance that it's all about relevance. And the reason I believe that is because it's a lot more scalable. So personalization looks something like, hey, I was on your LinkedIn. I see you went to City of London University. My uncle also went there, so it's good to, something like that, right? Whereas relevance is understanding your ICP, Alrik. So if you were an SDR leader, understanding what they're complaining about in all of their management meetings and understanding how Cognism can fix that. And it's about understanding their problems and getting straight in there. And I find that to be a lot more a genuine approach. It feels a lot more authentic, and it's better than personalization, because you don't have to research it individually every single time. You can call 50 SDR leaders, and 9 times out of 10 they're going to have the same problems and complaints. So that's why I choose that as opposed to personalization.
But also you build authority quicker for you because you show that you know them. You don't need to look for something that on the LinkedIn profile, because you say, yeah, I know your world as an SDR leader, and I know your main pain. So that's good, because on the phone, I imagine prospects are going to listen to you quicker.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly found it anyway. I just think that when I did start Cognism and when I started cold calling and reaching out, doing this job, I did try to use personalization, but I found that actually it just feels really insincere, and it's just almost a little bit of an excuse for not understanding your ICP as well as perhaps you should have. So if you really understand their pains and their problems, there's no real need for personalization. You can just get on the call, and you're going to very quickly be able to give them the same effect by showing them you understand their world, and it gets you in the same place, really.
And now when it's talk also about the top-down approach, because normally in an enterprise segment, a lot of SDR I'm talking with, they're talking about the bottom-up approach, but then on your side, it's more the top-down approach. So what can you explain why you prefer to do the top-down approach?
Yeah, so first off, what's important to me is I don't want to discredit the bottom-up approach by any chance, by any means. There are, especially in the companies that are over 500, and if you're speaking to these VPs, some of them, bottom-up approach can be incredibly effective. I don't deny that, but for an SDR with my style, I find the top-down approach to be a lot more effective, just because I understand my ICP and their pains, and if I can get straight to the VP with that in the initial meeting, then that's going to save me a lot of time. And if I find for whatever reason that's not working, that I'm not getting through to the VPs, to the directors, then I'm going to move down, right? I'm going to speak to the managers. I'm going to speak to... and then you see what I mean? And then if that's still not working, then I speak to the SDRs. I need to find real quantifiable pain. I need to find out their current provider, what's going wrong with it. And then I'm going to go back and then I suppose work my way back up.
Okay.
Can you see my logic with why I'm doing that?
I think it's logic, because you want to prioritize the decision makers first, and then if you don't get any replies, any traction, you go down, and then you can leverage the information. And we're not here to say no, it's not the right approach. No, because like you mentioned at the beginning, it's at Cognism you have the luxury, because for me it's a luxury to have leadership that give you the freedom on focusing on the activities you want. And so that's why I was saying that, because it's not like, hey, here at Cognism, we do our SDR process this way, and Brad, you should do this way, and that's it. And so that's why I was saying, your approach, you prefer to do this, and so that's what's working for you. And that's why generally when you talk to other SDRs, something works for them, but then that is not going to work for you. So you need to make your process. So
well, I agree, and it's about... sorry, Alrik, I cut you off. What were you saying?
No,
well, I was just going to say, it is about, there isn't one mold that fits all. The job is really tough at times. And actually, if someone's approach is working for them, then that, I think management should let them do that and try and learn those lessons from them and apply them to others, and vice versa. Like, there's no one size fits all. So we are very lucky, as you say, Alrik, at Cognism, to have that freedom.
Now we almost at the end, so I have two questions before we end the episode today. So what's your favorite resource as an SDR? It can be a tool, it can be a podcast, it can be a blog. What's your favorite resource?
Well, it would seem silly to come onto the SDR Game podcast and not talk about the SDR Game podcast, wouldn't it? But I think that's a little bit too obvious. Obviously, if they're already listening to the podcast, they're doing something right. Do you know what? My favourite... Again, it also seems way too obvious to say Cognism's contact database is the best. But genuinely, if we're being totally honest, I love Gong. I love Gong so much, because I found when I joined the company, there was no better training for me than listening to the calls of the top performers, finding out what they're doing, what's working. I can also... I mean, on a much simpler level, it allows you to see when your prospect turns up to the demo, so you don't have to sit biting your nails off and worry about them not turning up. But in terms of that training aspect, I love it because I can spy on the other top performers. I can listen into what they're doing. What can I be doing better? What are they doing differently? That's fantastic. That is like a fantastic approach for me. So Gong is brilliant.
No, and it is because I remember when at Cheaper we bought the Gong this year, actually. I think it was 5 or 6 months ago for the SDR team. And before that, generally you need to go talk to another SDR. But no, I'm sorry, no, we are using Salesloft. So we were using Salesloft. So generally you are using Salesloft, but it's not the same experience to find all the calls. So yeah. What advice would you give to a smart and driven new enterprise SDR, and what advice should they ignore?
Most obviously, it probably makes sense for me to pick up where I just started, which is, you need to make like a sponge and just soak up everything that your top performers are doing, right? So it's a matter of utilizing those tools like Gong or whatever it is, just listening to their calls, even if it's just sitting next to them, and understanding what they're doing on the phones, what they're doing with their day that's helping them to achieve so much. They're not superheroes. They're not doing anything crazy. There's things that you can take from them that will work for you. So that's number one. And then number two is a little bit what we've already touched on. You have to understand your ICP better than anybody else in that office. That is going to be, for want of a better word, your superpower. Like if you understand better than anyone in that office what the sales director of a tech company in the UK is just gone into his boardroom complaining about, and how Cognism or whatever it is can solve that, then that is almost a superpower when you get on the phone and you speak to these prospects, for rapport building, for everything. So that's number two. And then number three is don't be afraid to A/B test and try different things and different approaches. You should run your SDR career like its own business in that sense. You've got to try different things and fail. You've got to try things that work and then iterate on those. It's really tough, and in this job we all know that it is, but people that aren't afraid to try a different approach are the ones that will keep winning. So you have to do that, and you also have to really understand your numbers, your conversion rates, and how what you need to do to win, right? Your inputs versus your outputs. So that can be even building reports in Salesforce to understand those numbers, right? Those are all steps that are proactive that other SDRs probably aren't doing, which all comes back to that proactivity versus reactivity, Alrik. It's on you to learn, to improve, to succeed. Not even your SDR manager can do that for you. So you've got to keep doing that. That's I think, all of my little SDR knowledge, I think, combined into one little thing. So yeah.
And what advice should they ignore? Sorry.
I think there's just a lot of, I think that sometimes we're all guilty of especially when we're new to a role. We get on LinkedIn and we follow everyone we can, which is great in some ways, but we take every little piece of advice that they give, right? And we don't. I guess what I'm trying to say is take everything with a pinch of salt, which means people are in different industries, targeting different job titles, with very different approaches. Just because they've had an experience and they've shared it on LinkedIn doesn't always necessarily mean that that's your experience, or what your experience will be. So it's really tough to say what specific advice they should ignore. But I think just having that attitude in general, yeah, I think that's probably a good and safe approach for an SDR that's crawling through LinkedIn. Not your stuff though, Alrik. You should listen to you. I should say that.
Thanks, Brad. Well, it was a really fun conversation. So thanks for taking the time today to be here on the podcast. So I don't want to end it prematurely. So is there anything else that you would like to share?
There's nothing, actually. I think, I hope anyway, that we've done a good job in helping the SDRs that are going to be listening to this. I'm going to probably go back and listen to this and see if there's any advice that I missed. But Alrik, it's been a real pleasure, and thank you for having me on. I was really, really happy that you asked me. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, so thank you.
Yeah, of course. And it was nice to see you. So, and thanks everyone for listening to this episode. I see you on the next one.
See you later. Bye.